Morning, County Council. I'll call the meeting to order this morning, and I'll ask us to rise to sing O Canada. But once we're done singing the anthem, I'd ask you to remain standing, and we'll have a moment of silence in memory of former warden who passed away this past week.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Madam Clerk, could you take the roll, please?
Councillor Mackey,
Present.
Councillor McKay,
Here.
Councillor Carlton, Councillor Pringle, Councillor McQueen, Councillor Nielsen, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Dickert, Councillor Kentner, Councillor Keaveney, Councillor Body, Councillor Gregg, Warden Milne,
Present.
Councillor Dobreen,
Present.
Councillor Matrosovs, Councillor Bornignon,
Present.
Councillor Eccles, Councillor Hutchinson. We have all members in attendance today.
Thank you, Tara. And then before we begin, I wish to respectfully acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, people of the Three Fires, known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. And further, we give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, known collectively as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of these lands and waters. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and friendship with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Is there any declaration of interest related to any item on this agenda? Seeing none, if one should arise during the course of the meeting, you can declare it at that time. We have some minutes to adopt or consideration for adoption. The first is the County Council and Committee of the Whole minutes dated January 25th. Moved by Councillor Body, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Any discussion? Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just under news and celebrations of County Council, Councillor Kentner shared news. I think it was Grace Albo, not the NEC, Niagara Escarpment Commission, and it says Niagara Escarpment on there. Right, so.
Okay, we'll make that change. Yep. Thank you. Any other? All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. The next set of minutes is from the closed Committee of the Whole meeting minutes dated January 25th. Councillor Keaveney, Councillor Hutchison. Any discussion? All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And the final set of minutes is the Long-Term Care Redevelopment Task Force minutes dated January 31st. Someone care to move those? Councillor Mackey. Need a seconder. Councillor Deckert. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We have no closed meeting matters, no reports. We have bylaws. There's 3 there. If no one objects, we'll take them as a collective. Bylaws 5173/24 to 5175/24 be introduced and taken as read a first, second, and third time. And the 3 bylaws are listed there. Moved by Councillor Nielsen, Councillor Dickert. Any discussion? All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. News and celebrations. Anybody have anything they'd like to share? Councillor Mattress, please.
Thank you. Through you, the warden. I would like to share with everyone that Clarksburg Has Heart, a traditional gathering place in Clarksburg, is coming up this weekend. It's on Saturday. So Saturday, February 10th, and there are all sorts of activities happening. The businesses are open at various different hours throughout the day. Workshops are being offered. Some are just drop in and make a craft, and others are sign up ahead of time. There's a vendors market as well at the Marsh Street Center. So there's lots to do depending on your day. So if you're interested in traveling out that way, and hopefully the weather will cooperate, it's this Saturday, and I'd encourage you to go to visitclarksburg.ca for all the details. Visit clarksburg.ca. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Anyone else? Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden and County Council. It's also, I want to bring forward a past reeve from the village of village of Flesherton. Bob Elliott passed away this past week. And I think he served 15 years. I don't have the information in front of me, but he served in the village of Flesherton for a lot of years and was a very active individual in that community. And we as municipality Greyhounds have lowered our flags to recognize the individual of a past council. And from the history part, in 1997, it was when Flesherton merged or amalgamated with Artemisia prior to our amalgamation. And so he was on council up until that time. So I don't know if anybody would remember Bob Elliott, but a very strong community person. And so I just wanted to raise that as somebody who served and had served at county council at the time as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Carlton.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and good morning, County Council. I'd just like to remind everybody that the Chinese New Year celebrations will be taking place at Grave Roots this Saturday morning from 10 till 12.
Thank you, Sue. Yours truly will be there. Councillor DeBreen.
Good morning, Warden Milne and County Council. Thank you. I too had hoped to be at the Chinese New Year, but sadly I might not be able to make it. I did want to mention that our organization, Junction Community Initiatives out of Southgate, is collaborating with many organizations, including Grey Roots Museum, to bring a number of Black history celebrations throughout the month of February. And you can find the schedule on their Facebook page, Junction Community Initiatives. Hoping that we will see many of you out at some of these celebrations at the libraries, at their closing ceremony on March 2nd as well. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Barb. Councillor Body.
Not sure if you're going to cover it, Warden, but maybe I'll cover it. You know, Valentine's Day is coming up February 14th, and nothing says I love you like coming home with a new job. And Grey County is hosting the annual regional job fair at the Harry Lumley Bayshore Community Center from 1 until 6 on the 14th. Lots of employers there looking for employees. If you know anyone that's looking for a job that doesn't want to wait until Christmas to get a job at the mall, there's lots of jobs. I'll explain it later. It's pretty well attended, and especially by employers. So it's a great opportunity for kids, maybe look for summer jobs even to go to. So thanks to the county for organizing that.
Thanks, Ian. I wasn't sure where you were going with that at the start, but that's good. Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Warden Milne. I have a couple of different things to bring to attention here. First, I'd like to thank Councillor Eccles for hosting the West Grey Mayor's Breakfast, and it was a really well attended event that was, I think, well enjoyed by everybody there. I just wanted to point out that I appreciated the honesty to which Mayor Eccles spoke about the difficulties we're all facing with our budgets and how there's been some significant challenges this budget cycle, not just at the county, but other lower tier. So I wanted to say thank you for those comments there, Mayor Eccles. Also wanted to mention that kind of celebrating Grey Highlands, the community members who put together a viewing of Still Standing, the Markdale episode at the Ainsley United Church. They're doing a event this year, still going at the Ainsley United Church, February 17th in the evening. It's just a kind of a celebration of this past year in Grey Highlands. So they're hoping for a lot of community to come out and just celebrate all the different things that have happened. And then I also wanted to mention that Grey Highlands is participating in the Coldest Night of the Year event that's taking place on Saturday, February 24th. Grey Highlands is hosting it in Markdale. There's a 2.5 kilometer walk around the town of Markdale to raise funds to support homelessness and hunger. And also all the proceeds will be staying local as it supports the Southeast Grey Community Health Services as well as United Way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much for all of that information. Someone care to move adjournment? Councillor Eccles, Councillor Matrosovs, all those in favor? That is carried. Just take a minute to change over to the committee of the whole. Thank you, Rob. I'll call our committee of the whole meeting this morning to order. Is there any declaration of interest related to any item on this agenda? Not seeing one. You can declare it at any time. Is there any business arising from minutes? Well, I guess we didn't have any. Delegations. We have Peter Fries. He's with MTE Voxtur Assessment. He's going to talk about tax policy. I know we all are looking forward to that. So, Peter, he's online. There he is.
I am.
Hey, Peter. Sorry,
Hi.
I'm looking out here. Where's Peter? Here he is right here in front of me.
I'm going to bore you with tax policy from afar this morning. So
that was not what I was insinuating. The floor is yours, sir. Away you go.
I'm going to share my screen as long as that works. All right, so thank you, Warden and Council. I'm going to talk about property tax policy this morning and the county's current property tax circumstances. We will make sure that's. We will we're going to go over some concepts about Ontario's property tax system, just as a bit of a refresher. We went into this extensively last year. It's going to be much shorter, and I'll go through it fairly efficiently to get on to the county's actual tax circumstances, landscape, how things have changed from last year. So understanding assessment change, how that turns into tax change, tax policy options, and we'll talk a little bit about municipal levy change, mainly in a conceptual manner. Just an important note, this is a background. There's no staff report attached to this. So these aren't, although we're looking at actual numbers and figures, it's not attached to an actual decision. It is a background document. So I just want to clarify that. As noted, we're going to start just with a quick, what are we talking about property tax? How does it work? And there can be a lot of misconceptions around this, how it works, why people pay what they pay, or why people should pay what they pay. But in Ontario, and I think this is a pretty simple concept, everybody's property tax is calculated when it comes to printing your bill, to applying a tax rate against the property's assessed value. Property assessments, or the estimated value of your property, is based on an estimate of market value, and we're currently using market values from January 1st, 2016, market value estimates. So they're quite old. and right now we're in a reassessment pause. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means. Each property is also assigned a property class that allows us to distribute the taxes in a couple different ways. So primarily, before we get to the individual tax liability, it's important to understand that we use the assessment base as a manner of distributing the tax. So your assessment, we're not taxing it in the same way that you're taxing a transaction at a store. It's your share. So it's your share of the assessment base really turns into your share of the tax. And as I mentioned, in Ontario, what we have is we are distributing it a couple different ways. We are using value to distribute the tax, but we augment that a bit by tax classification. We use different classes. And this is where we get into manipulating that balance of taxation. We can tax, currently business taxes a little higher than we tax $1 of residential assessment. We tax farm a little less and things like that. And those actual ratios we use, which are in this is just a hypothetical example, an illustration right here, we're using those. That's part of county council's decision. You decide where you're going to set those ratios, where those relationships are going to be. So that'll be the core of what one of the things we'll be discussing when we get to your actual material. You can also adjust the balance of taxation through a number of different ways. There's tax ratios. You must make that decision every year. That is a county bylaw that comes forward. And you have to decide what ratios you're using. Even if you're using last year's, you have to make that decision. Same thing with discounts. Discounts are how we treat certain underutilized property or unimproved land. And we have a couple other tools that you would only use under certain circumstances if it called for it. So your main decisions in terms of balance of taxation, not how much you raise, but how it's going to be shared, have to do with ratios. And those decisions are made within the context of the annual tax discussion. And the county and local area municipalities have to make a number of decisions before tax bills can go in the mail and that revenue can be raised that you need. You need to set your levies, how much you're going to raise via the property tax. So how much do you need your taxpayers to contribute through the property tax? Those decisions are made as part of your budget, integral to your spending decisions and all those types of things. The county must set tax ratios, subclass treatment, because again, those are going to affect how the tax rates relate to each other, the balance of taxation, for farm and managed forest and multi-residential and things like that. We can adjust those. For Grey County, and we'll show you how this works a bit, there's another nuance. The city of Owen Sound sets its own ratios as a local area municipality. This is a unique situation for Owen Sound. Doesn't apply anywhere else in the province. It's just unique to Grey County and Owen Sound, and we'll see how that works. It makes things a little more complicated, but over time, those ratios have moved together. And really, as I said, even if you're using last year's parameters, there is no status quo. The tax base is changing, kind of the ground's changing underneath your feet. So even last year's decisions make a little bit different outcome this year because that base has changed. We always have to understand what's happening, revisit these questions, revisit this discussion every year. And because we are taxing, you're making decisions about the tax policy, the tax levy, how much you're going to raise, how it's going to be distributed. You're applying those decisions to your assessment base, which is the valuation and classification of all your properties. So when we're making decisions and considering tax change, how property taxes are changing for individual taxpayers, how much we're raising as a municipality, how much more we're raising and why did it change from last year, who's paying the increase or the decrease, things like that. We have to look at each variable within the system separately, and we can quantify how they affect things. And there's four main categories. We have reassessment, can affect the balance of taxation. That's not happening right now, but it's important to know what that means because it's important to know what's not happening or what we're sort of missing out on. and make sure that we understand what is happening. We have growth. Growth is exactly what it sounds like. That is an expansion of your taxing capacity. You have new base, new properties. Generally, that's not new geography. It is just new taxable improvements within the municipality. And then there's your tax policy, which we kind of refer to within this context as those questions or those decisions that affect the distribution of tax, mainly tax ratios. And then there's levy change. Levy change is additional revenue that comes from an increase. You decide that you're going to increase. We've measured our growth. We know what the tax base was carrying at the end of last year. How much do we want to increase? So we're going to look at these separately, and we'll talk about why it's so important as we go along and look at the actual numbers. In terms of those background or foundational landscape issues, we have that assessment base changing underneath our feet. And it's really important when we're looking at this and we're considering change to make sure we understand the difference between growth, particularly, and valuation change or reassessment. Even in an era, or actually particularly an era where we're not facing reassessment change, one of the big questions I get quite often is, well, we don't have reassessment. Are we missing out on growth? Are we missing out on revenue? Is that hampering us? The lack of reassessment is doing a lot of things and having a lot of negative consequences, but not, there's no impact on growth, because when we reassess, we take the exact same properties in two different markets and we just refresh that estimate of value. So in this case, this home was estimated at 100,000 January 1st, 2012. When we flipped or updated to the current reassessment cycle, MPAC went back to that house and said, well, we think it's now worth 140. So that 140 represents that home's share. Very different than growth. It doesn't create, it changes everybody's share, but it doesn't create any more money for the municipality, any more revenue. It doesn't change your base. What we're really doing at the class level or the property level is we are changing the shares. And, I'm intentionally going through this fairly efficiently, but if there's questions, we're really just changing shares. How does a share change? So when we look at this and we see that we had reassessment change or CVA change right here on this line, ranging from 18 to 8 to 16% overall. It's not on the class by class basis, which this example is. It is not that rate of change. It is not that reassessment change that drives our tax change. It is the relative rate or the change in shares. So in this example, base goes up 16.29% overall. There's no tax change. The residential goes up 18%. The corresponding taxes go up 1.47%. So everything's muted. One of the important things about this concept to keep in mind in a period where we don't have reassessment as counselors and staff is when the taxpayer says, wow, my house is assessed at 140,000. My neighbor just sold for 280. Are my taxes going to double? The answer is no. So that's important to keep in mind. How do we do this? Well, when there's a reassessment, we have to change the tax rates and we bring them down. So we're not raising any more money overall. We're keeping things revenue neutral because there's no new taxpayer. So we can't raise more money because of reassessment. And each person or each class's individual impact is going to be based on their relationship to overall change. So that taxpayer who just asked you the question, I think my assessment is going to go from 140 to 280. It's going to go up 100%. Well, if the overall change was 80% across the municipality, they're going to see a reassessment related tax shift. If the overall is 120 or 130, they're actually going to see a reassessment related tax decrease. Their taxes will actually go down because they're changing below the prevailing rate. So in this little very simple example, these properties, the overall 17, these properties that are changing by 14, 12, and 9 are actually going to go down in tax. These ones at 22, 24 There's a whole bunch of math behind this, but the important part is that reassessment, when it comes, even if it's huge, it's going to be about how shares change, not how the CVA changes. So, if we see, last reassessment, I think in Grey County, you're very familiar, farms went up on a percentage basis more than residential. So farm tax, there was a shift onto farms. If residential goes up more than farms, then there'll be a shift back onto residential in the next reassessment. Those are the kind of, things that will happen. It's all about relative change. We are, that's kind of a background slide in case somebody's reviewing this. So if reassessment, just to clarify, if reassessment is going to bring us more dollars and it used to bring us more dollars, are we missing out? No, because reassessment is very different from growth. Growth is where we're adding properties. And in the bottom here, you see, we're taking a vacant lot and building 4 houses or 20 houses or 2,000 houses. That's growth. That's new taxpayers, no new buildings. And we measure that on an ongoing basis in real time. When we add this house in here, it wasn't there last January 1st. It's there now. It came online during 2023. MPAC is going to assess its value. They are going to go back and estimate its 2016 value. It's not going to come on. I know the homes have gone way up, but just because this was built or was assessed in 2023 doesn't mean we're going to assess it at 280. We're still going to go back and say, hey, the house next door is virtually the same. This one's 10 years newer, but it's virtually the same. If this existed in 2016, it would have been $140,000. So one of the, that's, theoretically, that's what we're still trying to do. As we get further and further away from the valuation date, it gets a little bit more difficult. But when this growth comes on, there's a couple super important things to keep in mind. And this is your actual 2023 growth. So, and again, the pause and reassessment didn't stop growth. This is how, on a class by class basis, your base assessment base grew during the year, during 2023. So compared to the roll return, when we talked last year and set last year's rates compared to December 31st. Now, this 483 or almost $484 million in new CVA is provided by new taxpayers or taxpayers that improve their property. So I had a vacant lot, I built a house. I had a garage to my house, something like that. This doesn't come, doesn't affect the base as a whole. And there is corresponding new revenue. This is revenue related to assessment that was not on the roll when you set your tax rates last year. So when we apply those tax rates, it generated brand new revenue from new taxpayers. And again, we're not adding land, but if I had a vacant lot and I built a house, when we calculated the rate last year and you set your budget and your levy, it was based on the idea that I had a vacant lot assessed at $50,000. Now I have a home assessed at $150,000. So that additional $100,000 in CVA translates into additional tax revenue for the upper tier, the county, and the local area municipality that property falls within. This is the breakout of how the revenue changed during the year. So in upper tier county levy, your base was producing $1.7 million more than when you set your rates last year. That came online during the year. So this is new money from new taxpayers. There was growth, obviously, in the county levy, and there was growth in the municipal levies, the local municipal levies. It's really important to make sure that we look at this separate from other things, that we do this year-end growth calculation before we start looking at 2024. And I'll just take one of the higher numbers here. For example, we got Southgate. Southgate, 4.6% growth in county levy last year. Now, let's say the county this year then had a, 2% levy increase. Well, if we looked at last year's county bylaw and this year's county bylaw, we would say, oh, the taxpayers of Southgate are paying 6.6% more than they were last year. That's not actually the case. And we'll look at some real calculations later about how that is carried. But this 4.6 is carried by those new taxpayers. The people that were there last year, their homes existed, families, whoever it is, the businesses that were in Southgate this time last year did not contribute to that 4.6% at all. They didn't pay a dime of that 196,000. Only people that built new buildings, businesses, homes, things like that. And that is, that's more important, that concept, more important when we're talking in a two-tier than we're looking at our local growth or our in a single tier, because of what we're carrying and what our taxpayers are carrying, how changes are affecting our actual taxpayers and their bills. When we look at the comparison of growth year over year, the percentage is similar. It is up a bit. Last year, the percentage was 2.44. This year, it's 2.52. Because the base, we started with more to start with, that percentage, the dollars are up, over $1 million. Over $100,000 more growth this year than last year. So, growth is fairly stable. It's going to move around from municipality to municipality. You bring on a new, pick on Southgate again, lots of growth last year, probably had a bunch of stuff coming online. And then it's, that growth is there and it becomes part of the base. So we always go to the end of the year, make sure we know that year-end position. That year-end position is critical when you're making decisions, particularly at the county level, to understand that's what everything would look like if you said, we don't want to change a thing. We want everything exactly like it was on December 31st. Then everybody's county bill would virtually be the same. No more money, no change in tax shifts. That's where we're going to measure things like your levy increase from. We do have to change notional. We have to restate rates every year for your local area municipalities. Your local levies will, you still go through the restatement exercise, but in an era of no reassessment, they're going to come out to equal last year's rates. The county rates, there's a very tiny little change in them because of the unique Owen Sound circumstances and restating. We have to take the county's year-end position, which we just showed here on a class by class, and then that Owen Sound requisition, which we'll explain in a moment. And we have to take that 69,645, 324 that was raised at year-end by the county rates for upper tier purposes that were levied everywhere but Owen Sound, and then the unique Owen Sound levy. We have to take that to the New Year's roll, but we have to restate it as if that special Owen Sound circumstance didn't exist. That's our first step. We must do that. And so that results in a little bit of readjustment, very, very small, less than 0.1%. So very, very tiny amount, really for most classes, a few dollars. What is the Owen Sound circumstance? I've referred to it a couple times. Well, when you calculate your levy each year, and this, whether it's your notional levy or your actual levy, you calculate it on a county-wide basis using your county ratios, county tax policy for every municipality, including Owen Sound. So, although Owen Sound treats commercial different than the county does, when the county calculates its levy and decides how much each local municipality is going to be contributed, you use the county ratios. It's exactly the same as the amount to be raised in Southgate or Grey Highlands or anywhere else. So that creates, an equity and distribution in the county levy. The difference is we take that total estimate for Owen Sound at the beginning of the year, it gets passed to the city. They apply their city tax policy to it, which realigns that amount. So in this, because of their ratios, they're, a little bit more of that is picked up by the commercial class, a little bit less by the residential class. There's some adjustments. Things move around a bit. But the requisition, the amount, the 8,974, 599, is raised based on the county. That's a requisition. So it's unlike everybody else's, because everybody else is actually going to distribute based on these ratios and the county rates. Owen Sound is going to take the product of that and redistribute it a bit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. Once we have our baseline, what's going on, we can look at it different ways. We looked at the status quo ratio, the distribution of tax for 2024 before levy increase and policy change. We can also look at typical properties. We do prepare a study every year for county and local staff, which they have, that includes information like this, but also a full we break down the levy in a number of different ways, as well as the growth. So if you wanted to dig into that, that is available to explain how taxes change. This can be helpful, some observational measures. Where do we start with? The other thing about looking at, say, an individual levy or levy shares on a property basis, we can judge some of our decisions accurately. So if we say that a single detached residential is going to, a default is going to pick up $1,155 in county levy, and we contemplating a change, we could say, well, what would that mean for the individual taxpayer? So these measures are helpful as a baseline. So that takes us to really what I would say is January 1st with our new role. So we haven't made any decisions. We haven't made any changes. We're just restating for the new year. That is your clean palette where you're going to make your decisions for the new year in terms of spending and tax policy. Spending is something that happens in the budget. We're not going to talk about how we decide how much to raise. The fact is you decide how much you're going to raise. And then that gets put on. How much you're going to raise isn't a factor of your tax rate or your base. It comes from another place, and the tax rates are actually an outcome of that. But we do have to make a decision about things like tax ratios. And as I said, tax ratios mean that we have different rates for different property classes. How does that work? Well, it's not just an observation, as it is in some jurisdictions. In Ontario, the tax ratio is an input. It dictates what the relative tax rates are going to be. It determines the balance of taxation. And how it does that is it augments our balance of assessment. So if we just had one rate that applied to all property, your individual property tax liability would be based on your pure share of CVA or assessment. And that's true at the property level and the class level. So for Grey County, residential properties make up 74.52% of the base of the CVA, current value assessment. If we used a single rate that applied to all classes with no tax ratios, the residential class would be 74.52% of the taxes. But the county's ratios change things. They reweight or readjust the CVA. They say that we're going to take $1 a farm and we're going to make it basically treat it like it's 21.8 cents that each dollar of CVA, which means that although they make up 15.808% of the CVA, they only make 3.64% of the weighted CVA because we've brought them down with the ratio. That means that they carry 3.64% of the county's tax burden. So we take the distribution of the base in its pure form, what we're assessing, the property values, and we adjust it with the county tax policy. So that's a critical decision, and it's going to affect how much. So if we were to, you're not allowed to, but if you were to put that farm back up to 1, well, their share would be much closer to 15% of the levy, not 3.64. What would that mean for the individual farmer? Well, that would multiply their taxes by 4 or more. So we can, this sets a base, and we can make adjustments. Adjusting those ratios, they're your decisions, but they're made within a very rigid set of rules. We won't go into all of them. They're complex and interwoven. Basically, what's important to know is what your range is. What is my range of flexibility every year? Residential is what we apply the ratio against, so it's always one. That's our fixed point. You can't have every one being independent. And then these are your current ratios, or what we call your starting ratios. This is your flexibility. And as you can see, for the most part, your options are to move ratios down. The county reduced the farm ratio in 2019 from 2.5, where it had been since 98, to 2.4. And then again to 0.218. So it brought those down. As I mentioned earlier, there was high rates of farm change that adjusted for that. In 2021, both the county and the city, and these aren't shown here, but they're kind of like think of them as a sub ratio, eliminated subclass discounts for vacant and excess land within the commercial industrial property classes. And that meant that you flattened out the ratios and brought them down a bit for the commercial industrial. In other words, no longer a 30% discount for a vacant land compared to the parcel of land next door that was the same size, both have an acre of commercial land. One has a donut shop on it, one of it's vacant. In the past, they both got taxed on the land, and the donut shop got taxed on the building, but the land that was unimproved was discounted. So that was a decision made in 2021. And in 2023, both the city and the county reduced their multi-residential ratios. And the county's ratio was reduced 1/4 of the way from where it was in 2022 to 1, which would be equal with residential and new multi-residential. Now, that was theoretically a 1/4 move towards equalization. That was last year's decision. This year's a fresh decision. You didn't make a decision, even if you did on the premise of making a decision to do it over 4 years. It's a fresh decision every year. And so we've modeled a couple different things just to show you how this works and what happens when we change ratios. We've shown you what the next step would be in a multi-residential ratio reduction. So if you did make that second move in the ratio towards 1, you would reduce the multi-residential ratio by 8.29%. It would reduce the share of tax. We've also included here an illustrative example. What would happen if you reduce the commercial ratio? Well, the commercial ratio, if we reduced it by the exact same amount, it would produce a different outcome. Well, that's because the share of taxes in the multi-res is much smaller than the commercial. So in the commercial, multi-res makes up 1.95% of your base, currently, tax base, whereas commercial is 7.75. So making the exact same magnitude of change on the commercial class compared to the multi-res would be much more dramatic. It would result in a shift on the other classes of 0.65, whereas the same multi-residential change was only 0.16 because the class is smaller. So it's not just how much you move a ratio, it's how big the class was before the move that we have to consider. So we don't want to do this intuitively. We want to look at the actual impacts. And here they are at a class level at the county levy. Before levy increase, this is notional or revenue neutral. If you reduce the multi-residential ratio by that second year of a 4-year move, it would shift $46,000 in county levy off of the multi-residential class. And because no other ratios are changing, at least in this model, they would all increase at the same rate, 0.16%. So less than 1/4% impact on all other taxpayers to get that multi-res down. There would be, why do we see the larger shift, this shift off of Owen Sound? Well, Owen Sound actually has a significant portion of the county's multi-residential base. So those taxes there are shifting out of Owen Sound, partially off the Owen Sound requisition, because there's so much multi-res in there. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, but we'll we'll leave Owen Sound away for a second. The individual impact within each local area municipality or the municipalities share, it will shift taxes out of municipalities with more multi-res and into municipalities with less multi-res, but those shifts are happening in the same way these class shifts were happening. So it's not coming off these municipalities or coming onto these municipalities. Generally, the internal shifts are going to be dependent in your local area municipality. And again, this analysis has been done in detail, but for illustrative purposes here, county levy shifts are going to be at the same rate. Everybody's multi-res that is taxed on the county rate is going to go down 8.14%. Everybody's residential on the county levy is going to go up 0.16%. Your local levy shifts under this scenario are going to depend on how much multi-res you have. So Hanover, that has significant multi-res, they're going to see a more dramatic impact locally on the local area levy. So the Hanover levy. Chatsworth, who really has virtually no multi-res, I think that's just a parcel of unimproved land perhaps, you're going to see almost no impact on your local levy because the class is very small. So there are some complexities here in terms of what happens with the county levy and the local levy. Another just to illustrate this, we had a municipality doing a similar model or progression with a municipality last year in another county, and the mayor of the most urban center said, "Why are we only moving this much? It doesn't seem to be making an effect." Well, within that mayor's local municipality, because they had all the multi-res, it was actually very dramatic on the local. So we can't move things too fast. We have to consider the impact. What happens with the Owen Sound thing? And I created this table to show you kind of a few things. The bottom line is, and I'll explain this in a sec, but I'll give you the principle first. If the county reduces its multi-res ratio and the city doesn't reduce theirs, those reductions will not flow through strategically to the multi-res buildings within Owen Sound. That reduction in the city's requisition will be shared generally by all taxpayers within the city. So it's important because of the fact that Owen Sound sets its own ratios, and such a huge proportion of the multi-res, the county's multi-res, is in the city. These are things that need to happen in tandem in order to affect county's policy decision, if you were to make it, saying we want to reduce taxes on rental buildings. If you want to flow that through, it needs to be done in tandem. So, for example, and what we've shown here is that, county reduction only, then it's not going to shift. There's not going to be any local levy shifts. It's going to flow through, and we see in here, really every taxpayer in Owen Sound would be enjoying a 0.57% reduction. There would be nothing happening to this local levy shifts. Now, if both the county and the city reduce them, then things are much more even. We see that there's a flow through right to the multi-res. We're strategically targeting those tax reductions to the multi-res class, which, if you made this decision, would be your intent. Generally, that would be the on the surface level intent. If the city does it themselves and the county doesn't do it, well, that becomes very, difficult for the local residential taxpayers, because they are picking up solely the burden of reducing the multi-res burden and reducing the local burden. So ideally, it would happen in tandem. And I know there's a lot going on here. But the idea is, because of your unique circumstances, you want to coordinate your efforts in this regard. Now, there's, multi-res. I'm not, my job is not to tell you why you should reduce the multi-res or if you should or recommend it. But I will just say, right now, it is the most active ratio that I'm aware of province-wide. It's actively being moved down by many, many jurisdictions for housing. I mean, housing is huge. It's a big thing. There's also been indications or suggestions that the province might eliminate that differential. So some municipalities are moving it partially on the basis that, well, we don't want a big shock if that gets eliminated. We'd like to move there on our own steam. But, I think everybody can agree that over the past couple decades, we've never seen an issue that's a municipal issue that is so global and so getting so much attention as housing, right? It is a big thing. So those decisions with your tax ratios are going to be about the distribution in tax, their share. I'm just going to wrap up with explaining how other tax change, the final tax change, would be municipal levy increase. And this is the amount you decide you need to raise. Really, you have growth, which brings on new revenue from new taxpayers, but we're in an inflationary time. So we have to try to keep up with that. Generally, there's a municipal levy increase across certainly our client base, which is a significant portion of the municipal community in Ontario and in the news. Levy increases are higher than we had seen traditionally in lower inflationary periods over in recent history. So it's more important that we understand what levy change does. And if we have a levy change in this, we have a levy change that we are going to raise an additional 4.27. You are going to raise it this, 4.2 or 6.14%. Now, if no tax policy changes, then everybody goes up by 6.14% in county levy. We always measure levy change last, and it's always applied equally against whatever our base is, okay? Our revenue neutral base. If this is the amount, 69,645,385, that's the amount your base raised on December 31st last year, or within a few dollars of rounding. And so if we raise that amount this year, everybody pays what they were paying last year at the end of the year. New property, it would be your year-end tax. Existing property would have been your starting, or whatever you got in your tax bill. When we raise more, everybody shares in that. It rides on top. So if we change our ratios, then we may have more, we're going to have differential net change. Because remember, our adjustment to the multi-res ratio, which we modeled, that hypothetical model showed that we would shift some taxes off of multi-res and we would shift them onto other classes. So the year-over-year change in overall revenue remains the same, 6.14%, but the net year-over-year change on a class-by-class basis, so rather than going up 6.15%, my residential county taxes would go up 6.32%. County levy change, that doesn't get the county any more money, but the residential class and these other classes would pick up a little bit more of that. There would be a net tax reduction, with that corresponding shift for multi-res. We want to, again, I said in a two-tier, it is super important, particularly in a two-tier. This is important everywhere, but in a two-tier, it's really important to keep this straight. When we're measuring year over year, we can measure net change. And if we looked at last year's bylaw and this year's bylaw, and this was your levy number that we just showed you, this number here. Well, the county bylaw would show a levy difference compared to last year of 8.81%. We must not take that as an indication that your Grey County residents and taxpayers are paying 8.81% more than they did last year. That's not the case, okay? Remember, we had 1.7 million in growth. We had a tiny little year-end shift. This revenue neutral is the restatement of of that. So when we go from here as levied in last year's county bylaw to here, this difference is not carried by Chatsworth taxpayers in general. It is carried by these Chatsworth taxpayers, just a few of them. And then the levy change rides on top of that. So if I'm in Chatsworth under this model, my county taxes are going up 6.14%, not 6.93 and not 11.04 or 8.8. Okay. So just kind of, I know I'm hammering that home, but it is an important consideration because, you know, when the information goes out there to the taxpayers, and then we don't want to misrepresent how much more my taxes are going to go up. And if we want to consider the full cycle, everything, we can measure everything separately. You know, this is a growth. This is from new taxpayers. This is our year-end restatement. It's just an adjustment. It would be more dramatic in a reassessment year. These are our policy shifts. These are our ratio change. If you were to make that ratio change we talked about, then we restate, and then we apply levy change equally. Again, we can measure all the way from here, you know, the final levy, way back to last year's as levy. We can observe that change, but we want to be careful about what we attribute it to. It is caused by different things. Because it's caused by different things, different taxpayers are affected differently. So we don't want to, and I kind of belabored this a bit because these issues and patterns weren't as evident when growth was slower and inflation was lower. We're in a higher inflationary period with higher growth. So as those numbers grow, these impacts become more dramatic. And the difference between saying, oh, my county taxes are changing 1.2 and they're changing 0.98, and oh, my county taxes are changing by 11 when they're changing by 6 is a much different thing. So that's why I've kind of driven this home a little bit. So that's my prepared content. Hopefully I went through it efficiently without glossing over too much. I'm happy to answer any questions, revisit anything I said, or discuss anything related to the subject.
Well, thank you, Peter. I see your presentation every year and I think, yep, I got it. If somebody asked me an hour later to describe the details, I'd be calling you. Does anybody have any questions for Peter? Mary Lou, would you like to make some remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Thank you, Peter. He's such a great resource. And he did, you've got the abbreviated version. We did a full day with Peter in November that our finance team came to, and we invited all of our member municipality treasury staff to send people. So, and I got some very positive feedback on, you know, even from some well-experienced treasurers. They're like, okay, yeah, this is good. And it's such good training. So we're grateful to have Peter to access. The one thing I was going to say is, so as part of the November session with the treasurer group, we did have a conversation about what our tax policy would look like for 2024. And sometimes we're asked, why don't we pass tax policy in advance of the year? And Peter's already answered that in the beginning of his presentation, is that we can't. So in that tax policy discussion, we talked about whether there was any interest or anything else we needed to do other than the 1 quarter further movement to ratchet down the multi-res rate to eventually get, after 4 years, to the new multi-res rate. The answer, there was no further comments. And, you know, in conversation, obviously with Owen Sound, for the reasons Peter has mentioned, is that, you know, if we want to accomplish what we're setting out to do, we need to be doing the same thing at the same time. And that was the conversation with Owen Sound's treasurer as well, that was what they were looking to do. So I guess my next step would be, based on this presentation, is we'd bring back the tax policy bylaw. So tax bylaw, sorry. in March. We'd bring that the 14th so that we set the rates and then we provide that information to all your locals, because I know they're looking to calculate and say what the impact is with your own municipality as well.
Okay, thank you, Mary Lou. Councillor Eccles, you had a question. Go ahead. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Warden, and I don't know whether this will go to Peter or to Mary Lou. Peter, you said, you mentioned quite a bit about the notational tax rate. Been a bit of a bugaboo for a number of years, and I've asked the province at a couple of different conferences about this. Is it policy now or regulation that all municipalities must do a notational tax rate? Or are there some municipalities still out there fudging on that process a little bit?
Through you, Warden, unless Mary Lou would like to go ahead.
No, she's waiting for you.
It's a tricky one. So the legislation, there's nowhere in the legislation says you must announce a notional revenue neutral tax rate, but it is embedded in many aspects of the act that we have what we call a revenue limit. And the revenue limit is your December 31st position, and you restate that on the new roll. So yes, it's convention, it's embedded in a whole bunch of calculations that say you have to restate. Where municipalities, there are municipalities that talk about their rate. So what's my rate change? What's my rate from this year to last year? We've always counseled against that and said, you need a notional rate, you need to reset it, because this is going to be the measure of how much your levy changes, not your rate. And during reassessment, what would happen is my assessment would go up. Remember those early illustrations I gave you and said, hey, my assessment went up 16%. I'm keeping my rate the same, and I go out to the paper and say I got a 0% rate change. Well, your rate is the same as last year's, but guess what? You just raised 16% more tax off the exact same taxpayers. That is a legally measured tax increase that will show on the tax bill as a 16% tax change increase, a levy increase, municipal levy increase. So there are municipalities. It's not that they fudge it, but insist on announcing rate change. And I will say, those municipalities found themselves in a real pickle when reassessment was paused, because they were kind of grabbing the reassessment change or those phase-ins as growth when it wasn't growth. They were reporting on it as growth. They were telling the taxpayers, we're keeping the rate the same. Well, guess what? In a reassessment, in a non-reassessment year, we don't get that. Our notional rate, your notional rate, Councillor, is for 2024 is your 2023 actual. That's that. So we're still doing the calculation. So when we do our analysis, our systems still do the same calculation. But in 2020 and 2019 and 2018, it threw at a lower rate. In 2024, it throws at your last year's rate. That's how the regulated math works. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Mary Lou, did you want to add anything to that? Okay, good answer. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Councillor Eccles. One more, and I guess it certainly flows into the shift on tax rates. Grey County and a number of counties, upper tiers, went through this probably 5-6 years ago. In Grey County, especially because of the shift in the farm assessment went up so much, and that's when I think it's been twice in the last number of years that the ratio for farms has dropped, so that percentage, the overall percentage of the tax county revenue that farms contributed stayed the same. So it was dropped so that percentage would stay the same. Is there any thought at any point in time what's going to happen when reassessment does happen and the residential? Are we prepared to be able to move that back up so that the farm tax or the farm taxpayer is still going to be able to maintain their percentage of the
annual revenues that are generated or needed to be generated by the county at that point in time. Mary Lou?
So now we're crafting tax policy here on the fly. So Mary Lou?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. You've basically answered the question that that's a tax policy decision that would be made within the year. So when there's a reassessment and we have data, that would be the opportunity to take a look at what this looks like and how much res went up in comparison and what our tax policy will be for that year. Good question.
Okay, any other? Oh, Councillor McQueen.
Just follow up with that, but on the flip side, if agricultural lands continue to go up and residential has a tendency to start to taper off, that's also part of the discussion. Because I think I'm seeing out there that farms are still continuing, you know, to keep going up to demand, but residential, I think you're starting to see a little bit of a taper. Probably seeing a little bit of a falling back, but I don't see that yet on the agricultural lands yet. Maybe that's going to change with commodities, but that's a whole philosophical discussion, you know, which we're having. Thank you.
Yeah, there's about 16 sides to the coin on this debate. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Peter. Appreciate your time and your efforts to demystify tax policy.
You're welcome, Warden. Thank you for making time for me today. Always a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Let's see, it is 10 after 11. Why don't we take a break? We'll reconvene in why don't we say shorter, we'll try for 11:15. 1 minute warning. Thanks, Rob. Okay, we'll bring the meeting back to order. The next item on the agenda is the determination of items requiring separate discussion. Anybody like any of the items in the consent agenda removed? Counselor Nielsen.
Thank you, Warden Milne. Can I please pull 6B correspondence?
Yes, you can. Any others? Okay, could I have a motion to receive for information the other items? Counselor Dickert and Counselor Pringle. Save and accept 6B. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Items for direction and discussion, 7A. First is regarding regulating amendments to the bylaw, regulating traffic and parking within the County of Grey road system. So I see Trevor is going to join us, or has joined us today to give the report. So welcome, Trevor, and the floor is yours, sir. Sorry, we need a mover and seconder. My apology. Counselor Mackey and Counselor McKay.
Thank you, Warden Millen, and good morning, County Council. I guess today we're bringing some amendments to bylaw 4788-13 for regulating traffic and parking within Grey County. This is a pretty standardized report that we bring usually about twice a year, depending on requests and different changes that we find internally through staff investigations and also requests from the public. So the first one, it's actually a change. You can go to the next slide. Currently, we had a request from a denture clinic in Hanover at property 443 on 10th Street. They have a lot of clients that use Soggy Mobility and also just general accessibility concerns that they have. So the denture clinic has an accessible entrance at the front of their property, but again, the parking lot's in the back, and a lot of those clients have to either get dropped off in the back and walk around all the way to the front to try to get into the building. So it's just more of a basically trying to secure a spot in front of the building, because a lot of times the Soggy Mobility will drive up, there's someone parked in that spot. So obviously they got to go into the back of the lot or kind of block the entrance to allow those clients to get out of the vehicle. So the request was really just to have a spot that's secured so that their clients can more easily access the facility. So we agree with that, and we're going to add that parking spot as a no parking except for disability permit spot. So the next slide there. This was the speed request change that came in from resolution from the municipality of Great Highlands. I believe a resident had requested extending the 50-kilometer speed limit out to the garden center there at the south end. So that currently is a 500-meter piece of road that is under 50 kilometers, and that would be represented by the blue section on the screen. The extension was a total of an additional 675 meters, which is identified in green. Now, based on our Grey County speed limit evaluation policy, we didn't find that this was warranted to be reduced from a perspective rate change or rates of speed. However, what we do want to change it is because the Ontario Traffic Manual Book 5, whenever there's a difference of speed between anything more than 20 kilometers per hour, they prefer to have an additional transition period or transition zone of anything less than So either a 10 or 20 kilometer speed increase. So again, because this is going from a 50 to an 80, our recommendation is to switch this green section to a 60, which more or less, it gets relatively close to the 50 that's requested, but also provides, it doesn't extend that zone out too far because what we expect is there's really no residential accesses. There's no real reasons for the speed to be changed, like driver perception. A lot of driver behavior will still recognize that as a potential 80 zone, even though whether it's posted or not, it's just driver behaviors tend to go that way. The reason we decided to go with the 60 is if we didn't make this a 50, we would then need to include the transition zone, and then all of a sudden we're 1.5 kilometers out of Maxwell, and then we're really getting into a situation where we're going to see drivers that are driving relatively fast because there's really no indicators that this is a residential area. So that would be, the recommendation is again to make that green zone a 60-kilometer posted speed limit. So the next location is on Gray Road 15. Now this came in a request from a resident that lives on this small stretch off of Highway 26. And they were just noticing that as people come around that curve, the property is actually the one that's right, the entrance right on the south side of that curve. And they would notice that vehicle speeds were fast and there was concern about getting out of their driveways. The other issue along this stretch is that is only a 375-meter stretch of 50 kilometers on that blue piece. And based again on the OTM or Ontario Traffic Manual, they require a 500-meter stretch for any posted speed limit. So what we're recommending in this situation is extending the 50-kilometer speed limit through the green section, which would be a total of 575 meters, which is more than the minimum of OTM. And then further including a transition zone of 70 kilometers, which is identified in purple. Now, the reason we chose 70 kilometers instead of 60 in this case is because there's a string of residential properties you can see in the aerial imagery. And we believe that extending out for the 1 kilometer at that reduced speed would help to tie in a lot more properties while also still providing a transition zone that meets the Ontario Traffic Manual. The next location, it's Gray Road 31, which is in the little hamlet of Rob Roy. In this situation, we had a request from a resident who was looking to extend the current 60-kilometer speed zone that is east of the Pretty River Road there. It's identified in blue. This request was to basically, the area identified in green is a stretch that's from the top of one hill to the top of another hill. And it's a large valley through there. And what they were finding is they would like to extend the speed so that people would have an idea to slow down before they start to crest over the hill and run into the valley. What we found and why there is a current 60-kilometer speed limit there is there's a vertical curve issue at the church where there's a crest that meets a lower speed limit. So the 60 is there for that specific reason. Within the rest of the green identified area, there's no nothing that kind of identifies that to be require any sort of speed reduction. There's not enough houses or anything that kind of causes that reduction in the speed evaluation policy. Question?
Councillor McQueen, sorry.
Would you like questions now or at the end? Okay. So through you, Mr. Warden, and very familiar with this particular request. It came to our police services board last summer. I don't know if that's it probably is captured on Zoom. So part of the argument was that was brought forward by one individual was he lives on the section of road that is across from the church. And one particular day he was out on his tractor with a wagon, and because of the two hills, so if you look at, for everybody, look at the very top where the green starts, that's where you start to crest the hill. and then it goes down a few times and it gets down, and then when it gets to the intersection, which is Rob Roy, it still continues to rise to the crescent, which has been mentioned. The issue that was raised, because there's on that road, it's very narrow, there's a lot of guardrails on there. And he was on his tractor, and this a big, large truck came over full speed, was upon him before he even, and because there's no place for him to pull over, the concern was could that be problematic because of the high 80 kilometers, well, 80 plus. So part of the argument was there's those guardrails, there's no place to pull over. So if there's somebody that accidentally is going too fast and there's a slow, we do have farm vehicles on our roads, that there's no place to go. So that was a big part of the argument of, it's a county road, people travel it, and I know county roads are to move, but it is a hill situation that it also has to be properly and sanded and salted. So if that was a situation where there couldn't be, so that was the large argument to lower that from each top of each hill. I did drive it this morning, and I think it said 20 meters on both sides of those 911 numbers. I don't think you would need that. I think long as you were where those it's mentioned in there, the 911 numbers are basically on top of those hills. I understand that you'd give some notice behind that, but I don't think you would need to go 20 meters because then it just gets longer and longer. But that was the strong argument. Why that? Because there's no place to go. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair. I may make an amendment for that to make that argument change, but I can carry on, but.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
I understand the county road system is to move people, but it was a pretty good argument that brought, and then after that, the police did start setting up radar along there, and it just, and I will say that the county has put the flashing 60 flashing, has helped it. I think it's helped it greatly, but that is the big part when big trucks come over the hill, because there are two quarries to the south. If there was ever a situation and a small tractor or a big tractor couldn't get off, there's no place to go, because it's sort of challenged. If you can see the lay of the land, there's a lot of environmental rivers, banking stuff that it's just some places you just don't have that full. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, but that was part of the argument that was raised last and during that key services board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to that point, it is definitely something we understand, and we've had that, seen the correspondence and gone through that, and do understand there is a concern there. It's one of those situations where what we put our speed counters in that location, and what we found is effectively even within the 60 kilometer speed zone, we're not seeing a change of speed to like identify that reduction. So what tends to happen is by reducing the speed limit, you just create a bigger disparity in those speeds. And that's effectively what happens with the tractor. When the tractor is going slow and these faster cars are coming over, it creates an increased risk of collision. So unfortunately with farm vehicles, their speed is generally slow. Whereas general traffic, by increasing that, you're just expanding on the risk associated with difference in speed limits.
Go ahead, Councillor McQueen.
So there on that particular road, you do get a different array of traffic patterns, especially on a Friday. I think it was 2 years ago for snowfall, and this is the problem that people don't necessarily adjust to their speed. And I understand you can post it, but I will say when OPP set up their radar, it did change. People got the message once you do that, and if there's a larger zone that they can be enforced. I think it was 3 years ago, fellow lost control and hit one of our snowplows right at the bottom of that first part. Now that right at that bottom of that first part, it split the truck pretty well in half. Our plow had to go into the ditch, and it was even just before the 60 is there. And the problem is people drive, and sometimes they don't adjust to the conditions of the road. And that is an area that does have a lot of different types of traffic. So I understand, but I think from seeing the traffic patterns on that road and the issues that have happened and the narrowness of those roads, right, you post it, they still have to drive it, but it has changed a little bit in the narrower sections of that 60 and being enforced, but there is things that have happened, and that one was hit one of our snow plows, and it was the first snowfall, and I think it was like, maybe it was 3 years ago, first snowfall. Didn't adjust to the speed. And fortunately, nobody was hurt. I think our plow had to veer to the left to get away, and a vehicle pickup truck went to the right. Usually the plow goes to the right, but it had to veer to the left to miss it, and it smoked it. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I'll raise it later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I thought it was just some West Grade people didn't slow down. Trevor.
Sure, yeah. So that is effectively, more or less the rest of the Grade Road 31 here, but, again, and we'll, move forward. Again, our recommendation again is to not make an adjustment there. Now, however, the next one, Grade Road 119, this was brought through, report TRCW 2123, which we presented to council on October 12th of last year. And it was approved by county council on 26th of October. So again, this one is a speed increase within the blue section between Ravenna and just outside of Banks. And then a reduction to 50 kilometers per hour in Banks. Again, that was all identified within the report from last year. So now we move to some changes in school zones. Again, this was another issue that was brought forward from Great Municipality Great Highlands Council. And I believe it was the community zone within Maxwell that was also requesting this adjustment. What we have here is the current school zone is shown with both the kind of purple and red section. And the proposal is to move the school zone to the east side of Grey Road 2. And this is predominantly because as travelers that are coming up Grey Road 2 and coming down the concession, Road 45 there, I believe, they end up basically coming into the village and they don't recognize that they're in a school zone because there's no signage or identification of that situation. The other concern is with the school zone being so far to the west side of the school that you see those signs and then you keep driving and you kind of lose track of, you just don't really sense that there's a school there. So moving it closer to the actual school helps to identify the drivers. Yeah, okay, there's the sign and school's up ahead and they can make those adjustments easier rather than you kind of just lose track as you're driving. So we recommend making that change. And the other change in school zone, although it's not identified within an image, it's just a simple housekeeping item. And that's a change to the Cedarville Breezes School. Basically the times of the day where the signals are flashing, it's just adjusted to more accurately match their school delivery and pickup times. And then we have two no parking concerns. So the first one's on Grey Road 2 near Collapore. We've had some requests because there's a lot of what we find parking cars that are using the Bruce Trail in this location. Of course, that presents a dangerous situation because it is on the crest of a hill. So cars coming over top of that, potentially, again, they're not aware, and people getting in and out of their vehicles, it just presents an unsafe location for parking. Further, we do have the Collapore Uplands parking lot just there to the south, which also has access to the trail system. So we believe that's a better option for people out for an enjoyment or enjoying a day of hiking. So yeah, we recommend that the no parking zone be included at this location. And then the other no parking zone is on Grey Road 18 at the Grey Roots Museum to English Falls Road, and a short bit on both sides. This is predominantly due to basically the high school prom. A lot of the students there come to take pictures at the residence there in the corner, and it ends up being a lot of people parking on the county road, which presents a pretty dangerous situation. A lot of kids are not necessarily focused on traffic. They're enjoying the night out with their friends, and we just see this as a risk. There's also been discussions that they can utilize the museum parking and then access the property across the field, which provides a much safer alternative. So our recommendation is to include the no parking zone for this location. And that's all of the changes for this round. So any questions?
Are there any questions for Trevor? Seeing none? I have a mover and seconder. I'll call the question if there's no further discussion. Councillor McQueen. Okay, that's what I was anticipating.
Sorry. Sorry, Mr. Warden, I will move an amendment to, they're not numbered, so to the area of Gray Road 31. My amendment is from Gray Road 31 at 469-358 Gray Road 31 and at 469-570 Gray Road 31 in the municipality of Grey Highlands. Rob Roy requests reduction from 80 to 60 for that particular length. It does say on here to go 20 meters each side. I think that's a little excessive. And if I can get a seconder, I could maybe speak a bit more to it.
Okay, is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Nielsen. Discussion, Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And I understand the county road system is to new people. If anybody's driven that road, it is it is part of the escarpment. It's not a flat section of road. Also, further to what I mentioned before about the concern about vehicles and coming over the crest of those hills, there is a church with an active cemetery. And there are times where there are funerals there at that church as well, where the 60 is right, basically just right at that area of the cemetery. And there are experience high speed of traffic, people not slowing up quick enough. And I think from the reasons I said before, it's just a very hilly, very non-sightline area that could be, I don't see why there wouldn't be a reason why you reduce it to 60 at the top of the hills from a safety perspective, from all the reasons I raised. So.
Oh. Okay, good. Thank you, Councilor McQueen. Any other discussion on the amendment? I'll call the question on the, Councilor Gregg.
Thank you, Warden Milne, and I would like to speak out against the amendment on the floor. This is over 2 kilometers long in a rural setting. I think there's the information in the report is enough for me to be convinced to not vote in favor of the amendment. We at some point have to have a policy and have to have something to stand on and have to have something to support staff against every individual coming forward that lives on a county road system. You look at the map, I've been on the road. It does have some ups and downs, but we've got county roads, hundreds of kilometers of county roads that have ups and downs. And if we're just going to fold and look to assess everyone and reduce the speed limit to 60 or 50 upon request after request, I don't see how we're going to be further ahead in achieving our objectives. People want to move. If people are deciding to speed, that's an enforcement issue. And I hope they get caught. But I certainly support our staff and their recommendation on this one. That's where I'll leave it.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor McQueen.
Well, to sort of counter that. So this area going down a hill is 80 kilometers an hour, which means people can do 100 kilometers an hour. You have a triaxle dump truck full of gravel. A car can stop within so much distance. A truck cannot. There's a tractor going down that hill and he can't get off the road. What happens? I use the example of the snowplow, where the snowplow had to go to the left to get out of the road of a pickup truck that was probably going too fast. And that is in the area that's not a question of 60 that's current today. That's in the question of area of 80. There's been incidents on that road. As I said, there's been many funerals there that have had situations that could be questioned. You've got a gravel truck coming down that hill and lose control because It's different. Cars can stop within a distance. Large gravel pit trucks cannot. Until they crest that hill, they cannot see what's on that hill. It's flat along, and then all of a sudden you go down the hill. And there are times when there's a lot of material being moved to other parts of the county. And as you know, when gravel is being moved, sometimes time is of the essence. And people push limits. And it's different if that road had lots of shoulders and lots of area to get off the road, but it is not, because it's because of the lay of the land and the environment there. Some of those areas is really tight on the guardrails. I think there's one section, there's 29 feet. Well, there's no road, and it does have the paved shoulders, which I think it was one of the first roads that had the paved shoulders in our county road system. But a lot of cyclists use that road as well. All I'm saying is until somebody crests that hill, they do not know what's down the hill. And I'm just saying is the sense of changing that, not to a 50, but to a 60 is, I think it's warranted. If you driven the road, you know that it's not a flat road, and and there are a lot of gravel trucks that do travel that road. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment? I'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? That fails. Absolutely. Madam Clerk?
Counselor Mackey? You don't need to. Counselor Mackey is opposed. Counselor McKay? Counselor McKay is opposed. Counselor Carlton? Counselor Carlton is in favor. Counselor Pringle? Counselor Pringle is opposed. Counselor McQueen? Counselor McQueen is in favor. Counselor Nielsen? Counselor Nielsen is opposed. Counselor Patterson? Counselor Patterson is in favor. Counselor Dickert? Counselor Dickert is opposed. Counselor Kentner? Counselor Kentner is in favor. Counselor Keaveney? Counselor Keaveney is opposed. Counselor Body? Counselor Body is opposed. Counselor Gregg? Counselor Gregg is opposed. Warden Milne?
Opposed.
Warden Milne is opposed. Counselor Dobreen?
Opposed. Sorry,
Counselor-
opposed.
Counselor Dobreen is opposed. Counselor Matrosovs? Counselor Matrosovs in favor. Counselor Bordignon?
In favor.
Counselor Bordignon in favor. Counselor Eccles? Counselor Eccles opposed. Counselor Hutchinson?
Opposed.
Counselor Hutchinson is opposed. That motion is lost 60-36.
Thank you, Tara. So now we're back to the amendment, or back to the motion unamended as it was originally proposed. Any further discussion on that motion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Trevor. Appreciate your time. Moving on to the next report is a planning efficiencies report. Guess who's up? At 11:45, Scott Taylor. Morning, Scott. Would someone care to move this, please? Counselor McKay and Counselor Carlton. Scott, welcome.
All right, thank you, Mr. Warden, and good morning, Mr. Warden, members of County Council. Between tax policy and parking and traffic bylaws and now planning efficiencies, boy, what an exciting day. So I'm just thrilled to be part of the excitement here, and I'll try to keep this efficient. Just before we get into it, I would like to actually introduce somebody in the audience today. We have with us today Emily Brodeur, who is a master's planning student from the University of Guelph. And as part of their education, their students are required to shadow a planner for a day. So Emily has come to shadow the Grey County planning team. I say this so you'll go easy on me and not scare Emily away from planning. But no, the University of Guelph runs a wonderful planning program, and we've been lucky to partner with them on a number of occasions in the past. And I think having this ability to come out and see what planners do in the field is really important. So we thank County Council for allowing Emily to be here today. And so with that, we will get into the report. So this, I've said this before, but this one really was a team effort. A lot of the work on the discussion paper was largely done by former senior planner Hiba Hussein. All the other planners, both at Grey County and at the municipal level, have contributed here. We had significant input from our CAO, our deputy CAO, our legal services staff. And then there was a large amount of dialogue with your own municipal COs and municipal planners as well. So I just want to thank everybody that contributed to this report, because I think it is a more robust look at our planning system at both the upper and lower tier levels. With respect to why we're all here today, we're looking to be part of the solution alongside our friends at the province. The province has made it very clear through successive pieces of legislation that we need to be doing more and operating more efficiently within our land use planning system. And certainly Grey, like all municipalities in Ontario, wants to be a part of that solution. And we want to work with council and work with municipal councils to look at a more efficient system in that regard. With respect to how we got here today, there were numerous staff reports, some of which predated some of the pieces of planning legislation that have been cited. There was PDR CW 07-22. This was a report about 2 years ago, coincidentally, also right before lunch. And it was looking at the potential delegation of approval authority responsibilities back to member municipalities for plans of subdivision and condominium. And it was also looking at further efficiencies in the planning process. I can report, since that recommendation was supported by council, we haven't had any requests for delegations back to member municipalities, but we have been working behind the scenes on the planning efficiencies. Council will remember PDR CW 10-23 and the addendum. These were the reports that reacted to Bill 23 and the reduction of natural heritage commenting from the conservation authorities. And through council's support and leadership there, the county was able to take on this responsibility on behalf of the county and member municipalities, and we hired our 2 planning ecologists. And then there was a further report done on plans of subdivision and condominium with respect to the provincial changes on the non-statutory requirement anymore for public meetings in that regard. And then we've simply listed 4 pieces of legislation that all amended the Planning Act and amended planning processes. And we're all focused on efficiencies here, and we're all focused on implementing the legislation. But I will say, from a staff perspective, and I'm assuming your own planning staff have experienced this, and likely at your council tables too, it is tough to be efficient when the framework keeps changing. And so these 4 pieces of legislation have all changed within the past 2 years. And so it's kind of tough to know who's on first at times, but we're doing our best to try to be partners with the province in that regard. Wouldn't be a planning report without some caveats, I guess. This report has been discussed, as I said, the draft discussion paper with your municipal planners and CAOs. They provided input that resulted in changes to the report. There are some more operational considerations within the discussion paper that staff believe we have the ability to implement on our own. And then there's other things that will require council support, and in some cases, even future reports or bylaw changes, such as the delegation of approvals or the fees and services bylaw that was passed earlier today in county council, that obviously do require council's blessing in that regard. With respect to your own municipal processes, we're fully aware that each of our 9 member municipalities is different in that regard. They have different levels of planning resources on staff or on contract, and they operate in different ways with respect to relationships to their own committees and municipal councils. So none of this is meant to dictate to your municipal staff how to run their planning shop, so to speak. These are suggestions only based on what we've gleaned from discussions with municipalities, both within and outside of Grey, and ways that we could explore further efficiencies in that regard. So a lot of my discussion today will really focus on our own county operational changes, but as I said, there are some suggestions in there for municipalities. This report should not be construed as legal advice. Certainly, if you are looking at changes to your own bylaws or processes, it's always advisable to seek your own independent legal advice in that regard. And finally, I just note with respect to this, since this report was initially conceived approximately a year ago, There's been further changes at the province, and as of December 13th, 2023, as we saw in the PDAC correspondence from last week, there's further changes coming and further provincial consultations. So as always, staff will try to keep abreast of those potential changes or input opportunities back to the province and make county council aware. And should anything in those future changes change what's being recommended here today, obviously we would come back to council and adjust accordingly. So with respect to some of the county changes, the first one, actually, I'm pleased to say, as of county council this morning, you've already completed. So great job on being efficient in that regard. This was a change that we were recommending to look at updating our fees and services charges to increase our planning fees, but also to implement a new municipal review fee such that we could help recoup the costs of those planning ecology services. And that would come from applicants and developers, and it wouldn't come from levy. So with that, we'll continue to monitor those charges, make sure that we are collecting what we believe we'll be collecting, and come back to council with further information. One of the other changes in the right-hand column there that you'll see is trying to look at reducing any duplicative staff efforts at the upper and lower tier levels in this regard. And again, we're cognizant that the municipalities are all staffed differently and have different resource levels. But we do believe at all 9-member municipalities, you have qualified planners either on staff or on contract. And so we want to reduce those instances where you might be getting two similar opinions from a county planner and a local planner in that regard. So we do believe on some applications, including site plans, minor variances, Niagara Escarpment development permits, there's not much of a role for the county planners to play here. There could be a small role when one of those applications is on a piece of county infrastructure. So when we're dealing with Pat and Trevor and their team in transportation, we would still help provide those transportation comments. And where there's ecological elements or natural heritage elements, we would still engage our planning ecologists because they operate on behalf of both the county and the municipalities. But our goal is to shorten or eliminate some of the comments you see, particularly in your service settlement areas where you have detailed municipal official plan policies in place in most regards, and where you also have detailed zoning provisions. So one of the areas for reduced duplication here would be to limit those comments, except where there's county infrastructure or services involved in that regard. With respect to some of the other recommended process changes, this first one is a little awkward to present, and I just need to caveat this with saying this is not intended to be a power grab in any way. We are looking at recommending to County Council that you consider delegating the approval authority for plans of subdivision and condominium to county staff where there's already been municipal support for that application, and the municipality has already given their input on recommended draft plan conditions. In speaking with Deputy CAO Schertzer, who was the head of the planning department for many years, this is a change neither he or I ever would have contemplated 5 years ago. It's just that the change in the provincial planning system and the need to get things done quicker has made it such that we saw this is one area that if County Council saw fit, we could investigate changing, because in many cases, these subdivisions are very local matters in nature, and where they've already been vetted through municipal councils and received support, then this is an area where council could consider delegating. This isn't without precedent. There's already certain planning decisions that are delegated to staff, including the approval of a local official plan amendment, which has already gone through your municipal council, or things like draft plan extensions up to 3 years where there's municipal support. So if council saw fit, we would attach appropriate conditions to this to suggest that this would only be delegated to staff where there is municipal support, where there wasn't municipal support, or where staff were recommending major changes to either the draft plan of subdivision or the draft plan conditions, then the approval authority would again rest with the county committee of the whole as it does today. With respect to some of the other changes, there was a report PDR CW 17-23, which dealt with our public meeting processes. County Council has already endorsed that report last year, and we've shared it with member municipalities to recommend that your own municipal tables consider adopting a policy as to whether or not public meetings are still needed for plans of subdivision and plans of condominium. And again, this stemmed out of some of the legislative changes, which no longer require that. But immediately following those legislative changes, we had developers asking us, are you or are you not going to require a meeting? And so rather than staff having to make the call on the fly, we thought it most pertinent to get an opinion from county council, but also consider having your own municipal opinions in that regard through your municipal councils, based on the fact that the county has delegated the hosting of public meetings for subdivisions and condominiums to municipal councils in that regard. And finally, as a companion piece to that public meeting piece, as part of that same report, we talked about further education on both the development process and public meetings in general. And this is something that's still very much on county staff's work plan. We've met with municipal planners. Tara was nice enough to give us an audience with the municipal clerks last year to talk about some training, some further education that could be done to county staff, county council, municipal staff, municipal councils, but also some further outreach to the public to help explain to them the development process, where comments are needed, where comments might not necessarily be needed, the types of comments, the types of feedback that's useful for council to hear, and general decorum and rules, so to speak, with respect to public meetings. Certainly across the county and more so outside of our boundaries, we've seen some downright horrific examples of meetings gone wrong and meetings where there was actually physical public safety risks at the meeting. So we want to do our part to try to educate and inform while also streamlining this process as much as possible. And certainly, you know, we're not complete dreamers to suggest that every meeting is going to be smooth after this, but we think there's further education roles that we can put out there, both to the public development community and staff and council to help this process along. So with that, we'll move into some of the suggestions that we would consider talking about further with your municipal staff, and it might be something that you talk about with respect to your own municipal council tables in that regard. When Bill 109 was passed by the province, one of the main things that Bill 109 did was it tightened up the timeframes in the Planning Act in which municipalities had to make decisions within. And more specifically for zoning amendments and site plan, which are both municipal decisions, there are very set timeframes in which you have to make a decision. And if you don't make a decision within those timeframes, then you need to start refunding fees to the developer. That sent shockwaves through the planning community because it became a matter of, okay, how do we get this done during this time? And how do we budget if we don't know if we're going to be able to meet these performance standards? And planners across the province, not just in Grey, got very, very creative in that sense in looking for solutions that could A, help be more efficient and B, arguably maybe get around the legislation in certain ways. And certainly our legal services staff and legal advice that's come to the Ontario Provincial Planners Institute has said that it's certainly not the planner's role to find ways to navigate around the legislation. And in fact, that's downright dangerous. But what some municipalities were looking at doing was front-ending the development process such that pre-submission consultation phase was far more extensive. So you'd have more of those discussions with developers and builders and landowners prior to ever receiving an application that goes public or goes to your municipal council tables in that regard. And we think there's certainly a role for refining the pre-submission consultation processes. There's bylaws in place at the municipal level, the county level, as well as your own municipal official plan policies that could be fine-tuned in that regard. But the caution that we want to put out there is this cannot replace or duplicate the application process. So there were some municipalities across the province that were contemplating adding in mandatory peer reviews at the pre-submission consultation level. And in staff's opinion, the pre-submission consultation process is there to provide feedback, to provide the requirements to the development community on what's going to need to be addressed, to share any municipal standards, whether that be zoning standards, official plan policies, engineering standards. But it's not meant to be sort of that full review before the application's ever submitted. So we think there's lots of great best practices out there that some of our municipalities are already doing. Some of them operate development review committees, such that if someone's knocking on your door saying, I'd like to build a subdivision or a new commercial development here, they can get an opinion from planning staff, from other departmental staff, and in some cases, limited agency staff like conservation authorities or the Ministry of Transportation. So we think that level of sort of cursory overview and feedback is the appropriate level there. And certainly if a developer asks for a peer review prior to an application submission, it can be done. But the caution would be that it shouldn't be a mandatory process at that time, because that could be perceived to be, navigating around the Bill 109 timeframes, and that wasn't the intent in that regard. So we think there's room to work with municipal staff and work with our own county team to streamline these pre-submission consultation processes such that they're useful to municipalities, the county, and developers, but they're not having a negative effect with respect to greater efficiencies and the legislative goals in that regard. With respect to those pre-submission consultation processes, no doubt they are becoming more extensive, and municipalities need to look at their own fees and services charges in that regard. In some cases, municipalities have already raised their fees for those processes. In other cases, it might be something you want to look at in that regard. What county staff are recommending is by formalizing a fee structure in there and formalizing that process, say through a development review committee, you can allow for that efficient processing and vetting of development proposals while still keeping things moving through the pipeline in that regard. With respect to the fees, some of the best practices would indicate maybe you have a stratified fee in that regard. So if somebody, phones your municipal office and says, hey, I'd like to look at buying this property, I want to understand what the zoning would allow me to do and not do, then maybe that's a lower charge, versus if someone comes in and wants to build a plan of subdivision and has a series of technical experts and discussions with staff, then maybe that's a higher charge in that regard. One of the other things that came out of that Bill 109 process is municipalities looking at approaches with respect to how they process applications and whether or not certain applications could be processed concurrently, or whether or not they should be processed asynchronously. So just to give an example here, if you had a situation, we'll say in the township of Southgate, where somebody was coming in to apply for a plan of subdivision application and a zoning bylaw amendment. Of course, that plan of subdivision comes to the county, and that zoning amendment goes to the township of Southgate. And prior to Bill 109, our approach at the county and municipal levels would have said, the developer would apply to both the township and the county at the same time. We would process those applications concurrently. We would have one public meeting, likely in the township of Southgate, where the public could come, they could speak to the subdivision, they could speak to the zoning, they could ask questions, and then the decisions should hopefully follow shortly thereafter by both the township and the county. The concern amongst municipal staff here is that the plan of subdivision application isn't subject to those fee refunds, whereas the zoning bylaw amendment is subject to those fee refunds after 90 days. And as you know, I think from your municipal tables, subdivisions tend to take a little longer than, say, a standard zoning amendment. So if you were processing them concurrently and the subdivision started to drag on and you weren't ready for a decision on the zoning yet, you might be in a situation where the municipality is having to refund all or a part of those zoning fees. So I speak about this from a position of privilege because it's not the county having to give back fees here, because the province hasn't mandated that we give back fees on subdivisions. But I want to be sympathetic to what your own staff are facing and your own municipal budgets are facing there. That said, we still think it makes sense to process these applications together. If you could picture a situation, we were processing them asynchronously. Let's just say a developer came in and applied for the subdivision in March, and we had a public meeting in April. And then 6 months later, we had the decision on the subdivision, and then they came in and applied for the zoning amendment. And we had almost the exact same duplicate of public meeting in December of that year. Suddenly, we're asking the public to comment on separate applications. We're asking them to come to multiple meetings, and we're having to explain ourselves in terms of, this is what we talked about last March, and this is what we're talking about in September or December, or whatever my example was. And we just don't see it as a good use of staff or council time. So staff's recommendation is, except where it's legislatively or practically necessary to process them in asynchronously, i.e. where you need one decision first and say a registration before you can move on with the next one. We are still recommending that we try to process these applications concurrently. The other challenge, which I don't know that it's come up yet in Gray, is if you had that situation where we had the subdivision and the zoning amendment and your municipal staff refused to process the zoning amendment until the subdivision was done, we think there could be a challenge there because we're not aware of any legislative ability to just simply not process an application. Simply put, when you get an application, you need to deem it complete or incomplete. And if you deem it incomplete, then the developer can refer that matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal at that stage, and it could be subject to challenge. With respect to some other municipal process change suggestions, some of the pieces of the provincial legislation further enabled delegations of municipal planning approvals to staff, and in one case actually mandated it. So as of July 1st of last year, it was required that site plan control be delegated to staff. But there's other things that you could look at your own municipal tables, including consent applications, validation certificates, temporary use bylaws, lift of holds, and minor zoning amendments in that regard, where maybe under certain criteria, it would be appropriate to delegate to staff based on the fact that you already have detailed policies again in your municipal official plan and zoning bylaws. So you've already set the parameters under which both staff and the development community will play within, so to speak. And this might speed up some of those decisions and make it slightly more efficient, and also maybe reduce some of the burden on your own council and committees who already have full plates in terms of agendas in that regard. This next one, I think, is maybe one of the ones I'd like to underline the greatest, and that's there needs to be collaboration and planning work done between sort of the land use planners and the planning departments and our own municipal public works and operations and asset management plans. What we're noticing more and more, both within Gray and outside of Gray, is that we're running into infrastructure challenges, and largely in some of the most big ticket infrastructure challenges that communities are running into is the lack of available water treatment or wastewater treatment capacities. And, simply put, we can have the most efficient planning processes in the world, but if you don't have pipes for people to connect to and treatment capacity for the treatment of those facilities, then you're no further ahead, because you might have your planning approvals, but you can't actually build in that regard. So we think there's further room, both at the municipal level with municipal infrastructure and maybe with some county collaboration here to look at this matter further. We are seeing some of our member municipalities get fairly tight on some of their servicing capacities in that regard. In some cases, they already have capital plans and they've been collecting development charges to pay for those infrastructure upgrades, or they're already partway through an environmental assessment process to look at those upgrades. But we just feel that with how busy everybody is and how tight municipal budgets are, this might be a topic we need to discuss further collectively at the county and municipal tables to ensure that we have that infrastructure capacity available to meet our housing targets and our growth targets in that regard. So I flag it here as something we need to look further into, but I suspect it'll be a topic that we're discussing many more times at this table and your own municipal table there. And I'd like to say that county staff are here to assist. We're fully cognizant that it's not the county that owns and operates this infrastructure. But if there's planning processes that can assist with some of those future capital plans, or helping understand what's coming down the pipe in terms of projected development, then we're happy to help in any way possible. And finally, I don't think it's any surprise that at both the municipal and county tables, recruitment is becoming more and more difficult. And I say this both from a planning perspective, but also if we're thinking about the engineers and the operations staff and various other staff. In some cases, municipalities are advertising and not getting any applicants. And so we think maybe there's some room for further partnership here to help with that recruitment and also to hopefully minimize costs and development processing disruptions in that regard. So in some cases, that might look like a model that the county undertook with the planning ecology, rather than all 9 member municipalities having to go out and source their own consultant or staff for an ecologist. It was agreed that the county would take that on at county level and provide that service. In other cases, it might be shared services between municipalities. Maybe we've got 2 municipalities that can't quite justify a full-time planning position or a full-time engineer, that could split one. Maybe there's a role whereby you could have joint staff in that regard to help fill the role of multiple municipalities. Or maybe there's a role where the county and a municipality are sharing a staff member or staff members plural in that regard. We know that at the municipal table, some of you have looked to bring on consultants to process some of your planning applications or to cover other roles in that regard. And we do think that's a good interim solution. But in some cases that can get quite costly. And it might be something that you need to reassess every now and then to determine whether or not it's still working in the manner in which you hoped it would work in a cost-efficient way, or whether or not it's time to look at internal staff resources in that regard. And I recognize this is very tough to say as we've just gone through a very difficult budget process at the county, and a number of you are all in difficult budget discussions at your municipal tables. But we just see with the shortage of talent out there, we're going to need to be more collaborative and potentially more creative in our hiring solutions in that regard. And that's where the county wants to encourage collaboration, both between municipalities, but also between municipalities and the county in this regard. And so that with respect to some next steps and future considerations, should council support the recommendations here today, staff would move to implement some of those operational changes. We would come back to you with some of those changes that might require further council approval, such as potentially a change to the delegation of duties bylaw. And then we would, of course, share again the report with your municipal teams and consult with municipalities with respect to any operational changes or changes being looked at the municipal level. We're also cognizant that this is a first step, and certainly there's always room for improvement, and there's always room for further look at efficiencies in that regard at both the county and municipal table. So we certainly want to continue to investigate this. We want to continue to work with your municipal teams to look at that further. One area that if municipal and county council saw fit that we could look at further is our broader service delivery model. We've had a quick chat with some of our neighboring counties and some of the counties further afield to understand how their planning departments work in a 2-tier municipal government. And there are a variety of options out there, from a Bruce County type model where all the planners are at the county level, to other models similar to Gray's, where we have planners at the municipal and county level, to hybrid where maybe only some municipalities have planners and others are done at the county. So if there was a desire to further look into this, that would be a bigger task. It might be something that we'd even consider looking at bringing a consultant in to give us a fresh set of eyes from outside the system. But the key point here is that, this doesn't stop with the efficiencies outlined in this report, and we'd like to further consider greater efficiencies in that regard. And so finally, the recommendation on this one is that the report be received, that we be directed as staff to proceed with the county planning efficiency recommendations outlined in this report, that we continue to engage in discussions with member municipalities, and that we continue to engage as well with agencies and the development community to look at further room for improvement to county and municipal processes in that regard. So that was a bit of a mouthful, but certainly happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Scott. Very comprehensive report as usual. And before I go to questions, I would just like to identify Emily and welcome her to our council chambers this morning. You could not find a better qualified planner, I'm thinking, in the province than Scott to shadow. So certainly welcome to Grey County. Now, are there any questions regarding the report? Councillor Mattress.
Thank you. Through you, Warden Milne. I don't know that I'm going to frame this in the form of a question. I've been eagerly anticipating this coming to council for discussion because I'm aware of the staff to staff discussions that have been going on in all of our municipalities. And anytime that we can bring efficiency by doing collaboration on a 9 municipality scale is music to my ears. So I would really like to be able to, I'm very highly supportive of the recommendations to bring that back to our municipalities so we can have those kind of dialogues. I think perhaps I'll form this in the form of a question through the warden to Mr. Taylor. One of the concerns or considerations that we could anticipate in our member municipalities is, well, this sounds like we're losing control on what our town is going to look like. So is it my understanding that this kind of anticipated staff collaboration as well as all the other efficiencies, but focusing in on the last slide about creating staff efficiencies, is it my understanding, do I have my understanding correct that the official plans of each municipality would still remain intact? If there was collaboration in staffing here at the upper tier level that was now responsible for things that used to be a lower tier responsibility, that they would go through the checks and balances. So there'd be the non-negotiables that all 9 municipalities have to follow, go through that checklist, and then you'd open up the Town of Blue Mountains official plan and say, okay, now the things that could be different from municipality, what is their plan? Okay, it needs to match this, and that's how we proceed in this particular municipality. Do I have my understanding correct?
Through you, Mr. Warden, thank you for your both your comments and your question, Councillor Matrosas. I'll try to take a stab at that one. With respect to, and some of those are large what ifs and eventualities, some of this collaboration that we've highlighted within this report wouldn't necessarily require any changes to official plans. But if we got into discussing different service delivery models, we could look at the official plan at both the county and municipal levels to see what's appropriate in that regard. In a lot of cases, in terms of other models we've seen, there is still a county or regional official plan as well as municipal official plans. And especially given, sort of how distinct our communities are, I think there is still that room for those municipal specific policies to really shape your communities. But if we were truly looking to minimize any potential duplication, maybe if we were looking at the county official plan and our member municipal official plans, we would look at a model whereby the county sets the broad overall policies and we set more detailed policies for our rural and agricultural areas. But largely speaking, the county plan stays out of our designated settlement areas. And then your municipal official plans would do the converse, essentially. You would set those detailed policies for your growth areas, your settlement areas, and largely speaking in the rural and agricultural policies, defer to the county plan in that regard. And there are a few municipalities in Grey, including Georgian Bluffs and West Grey, that have already largely adopted that model. So for example, the West Grey official plan focuses its policy efforts on Durham and Neustadt. West Grey's 2 fully serviced communities and defers to the county for those rural and agricultural areas. So I think if we were going to explore those future collaborative efforts, there's definitely still room for community specific policies and that community autonomy in that regard. But I think there's further room for investigation to see, okay, listen, where can we all agree and say maybe in agricultural areas where even the provincial policy statement is already so restrictive, do we need 2 sets of policies there? And then this discussion gets further complicated in 6 of our 9 municipalities, where we also have the Niagara Escarpment Commission. And I don't want to speak in any way ill of the Niagara Escarpment Commission, but if we look at those layers of planning policy at the municipal level, the county level, the NEC level, then there's just that greater need for collaboration and in some cases, reducing duplicative policy efforts, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and thank you for the report. I guess you're talking about collaboration. One of the example is, and I guess this is sort of second part to my question, is natural heritage, which was at the Conservation Authority, which is taken away. But obviously, we had a process that we were moving forward, but we're sort of in that pause mode. We're going to hire a staff person to do that, correct? Because that's and where is that? And Remember the certain reporting to the Conservation Authority, I thought it was a natural heritage was taken away from the Conservation Authority, and we were looking at doing it as a blanket for all the municipalities, and there was a fee charge, which is probably an example of what you're saying. But I guess further that, where is that at? Because we haven't had the from the province yet, or have we? I'm following up on that part.
Through you, Mr. Warden. Yeah, thank you for your question, Councilor McQueen. So in this case, those changes to reduce the Conservation Authority's role in the natural environment took effect January 1st of 2023. We brought those reports to County Council. County Council was supportive, and we have hired those two planning ecologists. So those two individuals were both hired in 2023, and they have been providing ecology services to both the county and member municipalities since then. So that was probably third quarter of last year that would have kicked in. And then the fees and services bylaw update that was passed by council this morning implemented fees for those ecology services such that those fees aren't coming on the back of the general levy, but largely going to be funded by developers and applicants for planning applications. So that process is still in its infancy. We do hope to have our two planning ecologists come and present before council, introduce them to council, and explain or talk to council about what they do and how they can assist your municipal staff further and how they can continue to assist county programs in that regard. We are meeting very regularly with your municipal planning staff as part of that ecology process, because, when you start up a brand new service, it's never perfect on day one. So there's adjustments being made. There's constant conversations and questions coming in that we're in very close communication with your municipal teams on.
Thank you, Scott. Go ahead, Councilor McQueen.
Just a fault, I apologize. I thought was it Bill 23? I thought something was put on pause on that part of where that was going to fall. Now, did it get rectified from the province? Because I know we had taken a pause on hiring because we weren't sure what was happening in the province. So was there clarification moving forward? Because I was still in my mind that hadn't got clarified.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. You are very correct, Councilor McQueen. We took the initial staff report early last year and sought council's support for hiring one planning ecologist to serve the county needs at that time. And the idea was we would go back and consult with municipalities on whether or not we needed to hire the second. We went back and consulted with all 9 member municipalities, and they said, yep, go ahead and hire the second. We were just about to bring that second report back to county council to say, yep, we talked to everybody. They all want a second. Can we have permission to hire a second? And then the draft 2023 provincial planning statement came out. And in that April 2023 draft, it simply had a giant blank for natural heritage. And there were no natural heritage policies at that time. So at that point, county staff hit the pause button because we didn't know where the province was going. Later on, the province released a further draft of the provincial policy statement that had those natural heritage, natural environment policies in them, and they very closely mimicked what was in the 2020 PPS. So at that point, we had that further discussion with council and proceeded with hiring the second planning ecologist at that point. But sorry for the confusion in that regard. I missed that in the first part of your question, but you're right. There was that interim pause and uncertain period, but based on the further draft PPS, staff felt confident that would appropriately rest with municipalities in the county in that regard.
So following that, the draft PPS is to be finalized when? Or no, maybe you don't have that crystal ball. I just, if they've revised it, I know I was at a training session last fall and they were talking and at that time, it was like it was still on the older, well, sort of in between, they weren't sure. So can you give me some timelines on, because I think that provincial policy statement is very important, especially when it's finalized as well.
Scott?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden, to Councilor McQueen. I wish I had some timeframes there. We've asked provincial ministry staff on a number of occasions and they couldn't give us any definite timeframes. There was some speculation in the planning community that it might come in spring of 2024, but that was pure speculation. And particularly with that provincial announcement on December 13th, where they announced that they're going back and consulting on a number of processes that were already amended through previous pieces of legislation. I'm not sure what that does to their draft of the PPS in that regard, and whether or not that's going to be expedited or pushed back in favor of some of those legislation and regulation changes. So we'll certainly keep County Council in the loop as soon as we hear anything, but right now we have no time frame for when that's coming, unfortunately.
Digger Harrison would say any day now. Any other discussion? Councillor Body, when I see Councillor DeBreen with their hand up next.
Sorry, Warden, just a quick comment, not really a question. I couldn't help, but as I listened to that report, talking about finding big efficiencies, it really what it suggested is we need to have a discussion about municipal restructuring. You know, this is just planning, but it really gets to the same thing as how can we be more efficient? And that's one of the things that we need to have the discussion on.
Yeah, and lunch is here, so that'll be discussion at lunch. Or the strategic plan. Councillor DeBreen.
Thank you, Warden Milne. And to the question about when can we expect the provincial policy statement to be released, I just want to echo Mr. Taylor's comment. AMO board met with Minister Calandra last January 25th, and pretty much what Mr. Taylor said is like any day now, imminently. So we're not really sure, but we're going to hold him to that any day now.
Thank you. Councillor Eccles.
So through you, Mr. Warden, Mr. Breen, are you saying that that policy and the statement is going to be delivered by a Ford that only has a reverse gear in it?
Okay, we're moving right along. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Warden Milne. And I'd just like to ask if staff are, in the report, there is no financial implications, but certainly the direction from the province, from the federal government is build more housing. And there's concern with the cost of housing. And I think it would be, I should ask, is there anything here in the planning efficiencies within this report that can align with attempts at trying to contribute to mitigate the escalation of the cost of housing? Because certainly it's irrefutable. It's been provided in many various documents and different literature that it's not insignificant, the cost of government fees and studies and et cetera, et cetera. Are you able to comment on any alignment here which would contribute to trying to not pass along further fees? Because ultimately every fee that we put in place does go to the expense part of building the home and is passed on to the home builder.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. Thank you for that question, Councillor Gregg. So county staff did a series of consultations with the development community in 2022, and to find out where the pinch points were, what was driving some of those costs. And of course, 2022, we were still very much in a pandemic or nearing the end of the pandemic phase. There were supply chain issues and various other things. But what we heard over and over was developers would be willing to pay more in the form of application fees or municipal charges if they knew that they were going to get a decision more quickly, and if they knew that there was going to be a finite and certain planning and municipal approvals process in that regard. We heard a story from one developer who develops both within Gray and outside of Gray, and he told a story that he had a situation in one municipality outside of Gray where he was proposing a large development. It didn't quite make it on one council agenda, had to wait another month, and that extra month cost him $1 million. And that wasn't anything to do with the municipal charges or application fees or studies. That was simply based on the capacity of that municipality to be able to process that application from staff and get it before council in a timely fashion. So then if we link that back to some of the proposed changes in this report, We'll take, for example, the potential delegation of approval of subdivisions and condominiums for those municipalities outside of the city of Owen Sound who currently already approved their own to staff. If we think about a subdivision application, let's just say in the municipality of Meaford, it goes to the municipality of Meaford's planning committee or council or committee of the whole. And then a subsequent report is needed at county council. And let's just say municipality of Meaford staff need 3 weeks of lead time to get it on that municipal agenda. And then county staff need another 2 or 3 weeks of lead time to get it on our county agenda. Suddenly we're looking at, 4 to 6 weeks for an approval. Whereas if we had a situation where you still had that municipal vetting and it went through municipal council in that regard. Sorry. If you had that situation where it's already going through municipal council and should municipal council support it, it can be approved by staff without the need for a further staff report to county council, vetting through the clerks and all the processes that go into putting an agenda package out roughly a week before the meeting. Then we could save in some cases a few weeks to even close to a month just with that process alone. So that's just one example of where we think that if we can fine tune our processes, if we can fine tune those pre-submission consultation processes, hopefully that gives developers a little bit more certainty with respect to the application process they're going through and the approvals process they're going through. It won't work in all cases. There's always going to be those complex files that take longer than staff would like. But we do think for a large number of files, this could help be part of the solution. And so if you think about those own delegations at your municipal tables too, again, things like a lift of hold or a temporary use bylaw, maybe your municipal council might feel you have appropriate safeguards in place through the policies in your official plan and zoning, that's something that's appropriate to delegate to staff on a conditional basis.
Thank you, Scott. That's a good question. Okay, I think we are ready for the call or for the vote. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. That brings us to the consent item that was pulled, 6B. Councillor Nielsen, are you prepared to move the reception of that item or do you wish to do something different? Yes? Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Matrosovs, thank you. You want to speak to it, Councillor Nielsen?
Thank you, Warden Milne. I was just wondering if staff could provide an update as to what's happening there. There's been some questions and concerns from community members. I'm just looking for kind of a staff update response to the letter.
Yeah, I believe Randy is ready to speak to that, please.
Great, thank you for that question and through you, Mr. Warden. This correspondence expresses concerns about a potential parking area that staff were exploring as part of the Grey Road 30 road improvement project scheduled for this year. The correspondence provides some suggestions and recommendations on what should be considered when exploring future parking solutions and raises a number of really good points, actually. We've received similar correspondence expressing concerns about the location of the potential parking area at Grey Road 13 and 30. And this was mentioned briefly as part of the delegation by Dr. Martha Rogers at the last committee of the whole meeting that council may recall. So staff were considering this potential parking area as part of the overall Grey Road 30 road improvement project. And it was to help to address some of the parking issues that are being experienced in this area. There's a number of trail users and visitors that visit the Kimberley Forest area, as well as the Bruce Trail and Old Baldy. That's all located in close proximity to this intersection. Those properties are primarily owned by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, as well as Gray Sauble. The trailhead study also identified a need for more parking in and around this area, just as cars frequently park along the sides of the roads, which creates a safety concern. And Planning and Economic Development, Tourism and Culture staff will be bringing forward a report around the trailhead study in the near future, just to give council an update about that overall study. Given the concerns expressed by the community regarding this proposed parking area, and just given limited staff resources and project funds for the Grey Road 30 project, we're proposing to not pursue that potential parking area at 13 and 30 as part of the Grey Road 30 project, at least. We will be exploring installing paved shoulders as part of that Gray Road 30 project. We think that this will provide an opportunity not only to assist active transportation with cyclists in the area, but also provide a safer route opportunity for people to walk along the sides of the road to get to the various trailheads in the area. There will likely be some excess fill as part of the Gray Road 30 project, so we could look at locating some of that excess fill at that corner. We own that property, and that's why we looked at that corner as a potential parking area. So if someone wanted to pursue a parking area lot in the future, then it could be ready to go if we were to relocate some of that fill at that location. Transportation services staff are planning some consultation on the overall Gray Road 30 project. It could happen this spring if the project continues to stay on track. And in the meantime, what staff are proposing to do is just provide a response to Mr. French and further response to Dr. Rogers, just to provide them with an update to let them know that at this time staff are proposing not to pursue that parking lot as part of the overall Gray Road 30 project at this time. What we will be doing though is we have the outdoor management group that's been set up. We'll continue to explore parking options for not just this area, but also other areas. Should the landowners of those forest and trail organizations want to pursue parking options in the future. So that's something that they can pursue. In this case, like I said, it's the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and Conservation Authority that own the properties in this area. So that might be something that they want to consider pursuing as a parking lot options in this area with the community. So happy to take any questions that council may have.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Dane, you're good? Councillor McQueen?
So further to the current situation there is a ramp that sort of helps get you up the hill instead of stopping. Is that still being in the design to continue that ramp? Or I was sort of wondering if that ramp was going to be removed because you're creating the parking lot, but if the parking lot is put on hold, will that ramp still be included in the new design? Because I have had a conversations where because you're heading up a hill, stop and then go, it does give you that momentum to get up the hill. So I just sort of follow up with that, Mr. Ward.
Okay, Pat, do you want to speak to that, please?
Yeah, we are planning on removing that ramp as part of the project. We talked to our maintenance guys, operations guys. It's kind of difficult to maintain. We have a lot of intersections that don't have a ramp. We've removed a few over the years. MTO does that as well. They're kind of not quite as popular as they used to be. So we're planning on removing that as part of the project.
Thank you, Pat. Any other questions? Councillor McQueen?
I think there's going to be some disappointment out there just for the simple fact is it does give you that run up the hill. I understand that there's reasons, but it does give you that momentum to get up there, especially if you're in a truck or a propane truck or a gravel truck or whatever. You emerge on there, but you talk about climate change, you talk about a lot of things, stop, starts, use up a lot, and then momentum that's going. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this one? Call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We have no closed meeting matters. Are there any other business that can properly come before this meeting? Councillor Eccles.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and through you, and I'll approach it at this. I had the privilege last year at the AMO conference of getting appointed to TAPMO. Top agri-producing municipalities of Ontario have been doing a considerable amount. A number of lower tier municipalities here are a member of TAPMO. Became aware the other day that Grey County is not. And I was trying to get something forward, a report onto our next council meeting. Suggesting that Grey County does join this very important lobbying group and working group for to be a member. And I'm not sure whether it's through this or through a notice of motion that I bring it through here. So that's what I'm looking for from Tara and or staff. What would be the best approach?
I'm getting some indication here that a notice of motion would be probably the best, most appropriate route. So just hold that thought. Any other business? Counselor Mackey?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just to follow up on Councillor Eccles' comments, I certainly, agree that TAPMO is providing a lot of valuable information and advocacy for any municipalities that have aggregate within their boundaries. I was under the impression Grey County was a member at one time. At least we had representation at a county level, if my memory serves me correctly. And so maybe if part of, if the motion is brought forward, part of that could be looking into whether or not we ever had any membership, because I did believe at one point we were members. So thanks.
So I would think any notice of motion would look for a report determining those questions, those points. Okay, so no further other business. Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just a follow-up from some comments that our staff has raised and maybe other municipalities. Is there a conversation going on about waste through the staff? Can you just first fill us in, because I know myself and the deputy mayor are a little bit curious of to what extent or what's happening. So thank you.
I'll ask Kim to comment on that. Kim?
As you know, the CAOs meet generally monthly, and one of the questions that had come forward in our conversations was any follow-up to the original resolution that County Council had passed, looking for municipal modernization funding around waste management. And what we decided as a group was that at a minimum, it was worthwhile to continue on with some analysis and then some investigation just at a staff level that we could then bring forward to this table as well as your own with regard to the status of a number of aspects of solid waste management, et cetera. So there is a waste management community of practice being set up. Randy has started that work when I was away. And I think the first meeting is coming up very shortly. We'll be putting together a terms of reference, and some analysis has already started through the work of the Climate Change Action Plan. So we'll get some work done, and then I think we'll bring that back to here and update you and get some further direction. It's okay.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Eccles, notice of motion.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and through you, I'd be putting forward a notice of motion coming forward to County Council on renewing, apparently with the new information I have, of renewing our membership and or making sure that we have a membership with TAPMO, that Grey County takes a membership there, and staff report coming forward at the next meeting with that.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any other notice of motion? Not seeing any. I have one motion remaining. Councillor Nielsen, seconded by Councillor Hutchins. All in favor? To adjourn, that is. We're adjourned. Lunch is here, has been for a little while, so if it was hot, it's